afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the Brainy Boomer Lectures series. We're so very happy you've all joined us today. In 2007, the McGill University Research Center for Studies in Aging, or the MCSA Education Committee, started the Brainy Boomer Lectures series in order to suggest practical steps to both improve and maintain brain health, as well as to promote healthy lifestyle choices amongst the most populous generation in history. The MCSA's Education Committee, which was founded in 1996, has three main objectives: identifying education needs of healthcare providers, seniors, caregivers, and the public, and to develop responses to meet some of their needs, to enhance the positive image of the aging process by addressing stereotypes and myths about aging, and finally, the dissemination of research on aging. Dr. Lorraine Mazzella-Maiolo is a family physician in Montreal. She is the medical advisor member of the Education Committee for the McGill University Research Center for Studies in Aging. She is an associate professor of McGill University in the family medicine. Among her activities, she is physician at Centre d'Hébergement Henri Bradret, Richardson Hospital, Manoir Claudette Barré, and has extensive geriatric expertise. Before continuing, we would like to remind you to just mute your microphone on Zoom, and that if you have any questions, you could either write them down in the chat box on Zoom, or you could wait until the end of the event to ask them. And now I'd like to invite Dr. Mazzella to start her presentation on osteoporosis.
Thank you very much, Caitlin, and it's my pleasure to be here today. And as part of that most numerous amount of people ever to go into old age, the baby boomers, I'm one of them. So it's good to talk about a subject which is very important to all of us, young and older. Yeah, my disclosure is that I did participate in an ad board for Amgen Canada just recently. That's all I have. What we're going to cover is what is osteoporosis, the consequences of the disease, the causes, how to diagnose it, and treatment, of course. And you know, we're really lucky. We do have something for it. So it's a treatable disease. Okay, so one in 4 Canadian Caucasian women will suffer from osteoporosis after the age of 50. So that's a really high number considering the boomers going up. The incidence expected to rise as the population ages, and 50-year-old Caucasian woman has a lifetime risk factor of 40% of having a fracture from osteoporosis. And the most common, the most prevalent of these fractures will be vertebral fractures. And sometimes our vertebral fractures go unnoticed. Sometimes they're not painful. Sometimes they are painful. Sometimes they are hidden because we have other diseases like osteoarthritis that makes it look denser than it really is. And so it's a false sense of security on an X-ray to see it dark. So it's, we'll get into that, but yes, it is the most common cause of osteoporotic fractures. The other one being the hip, and they are debilitating. They do carry a certain morbidity with sickness and mortality and death. We have to first understand the bones are alive. They are in a constant state of renovation. They're like downtown Montreal. They're constantly being built up and knocked down, being built up and knocked down. We have a turnover rate of our bones. Our long bone, our spongy bone, the part inside the bone, is replaced every 3 to 4 years completely. And the compact bone, the harder bone, is every 10 years completely. So the bones that we had when we were 10 years old are not the same at 20, 30, 40, 50. They change. They're constantly rebuilding slowly, but they are constantly rebuilding. And every time we walk, we fracture a little bit here, a little bit there, but our mechanisms are there to rebuild the bone. So bones will constantly grow. When we're young, our bones grow. We put calcium by our nutrition. We put calcium into our bones. We go outside and play. We get vitamin D. We put our bones. Our maximum bone strength is at 26 to 29 years old for men and women. So we're constantly building up our bones until that age. And then we should be staying stable for a certain amount of time. And then after menopause for women, the estrogen is no longer there, we start to decline. Or if we don't have enough calcium intake and not enough vitamin D, we have other pathologies that cause reabsorption of calcium and from our bones, then we can start to have a decrease in our bone strength. So there's two things we have to understand. There's two words, we have 4 words altogether. One is osteoblast, and the other one is osteoclast. An osteoblast builds bone. Those are cells in our system that will go on a bone and actually build bone. Osteoclasts go on the bone and eat it up, make like a little hole, so the osteoblast can go into that nest and rebuild it. And that's how it's remodeled. The other 2 words we have to understand are osteopenia and osteoporosis. Osteopenia means less, that you have a healthy bone, you still have your strength in your bone, they're still strong bones, but they're missing calcium. Osteoporosis is when the trabeculae, the part of the bone, has holes in it. It has ruptured. So here I'm going to do is show you my vertebrae. This is a healthy bone. Like you've all seen a steak, when you cut it, you see the trabeculae there, right? This is a nice healthy bone. The bridges are strong and clear. And then we have an osteoporotic bone. You see the holes are much larger. The bridges are very thin. And actually, if I touch it, they get spongy. If I was to do a jump on this, I would fracture, I would break those little bridges, as they have done here. And this is an osteoporotic bones. There are holes now because these bridges have broken because of their missing calcium. Why would we be missing calcium? Well, if we're not getting enough by mouth, or we have some pathology going on in our body, or we're taking medications that deplete the calcium from our body, like cortisones, what happens is that our body will look for it, because calcium is a very important reagent in many chemical reactions in our body, for muscle, for heart, for a lot of the electronic mechanisms and reactions going on in our body. And if we don't have enough that we're taking by mouth, or because of other pathologies, what happens? Our body is smart. It goes to the big gold mine of our bones. It likes to go to our bones, and it will take the calcium out of our bones. That's a hip. Okay. So osteopenia, like I said, is when they lose their bone mass, and this needs preventative treatment. Osteoporosis is that they have a loss of their bone mass, and you're at higher risk of fracture. And at this point, you need treatment, not prevention. You need treatment, so that's a little bit different. The most common, like I said, the most common type of fracture is the vertebral fracture, and after age 60 in women, it really flies up to 30% of women. Fertility fractures occur when we have an impact from a standing height. Normally, if we fall from a standing height, we put our hand out, we shouldn't break. We shouldn't break our hip. We should not break anything. But very often, women or men, when they fall, they will break their wrist right here, and that's called a Colles fracture. And that is considered a fragility fracture, because the bone has gotten weak and weaker. Like if you have a car accident, if you fall from an airplane, that is a traumatic. We expect you to break. It's not a fragility fracture. This would be a fertility fracture. A wrist fracture would be a fragility fracture. So it can happen to anything, even people's ribs. I've had people who are osteoporotic. They come in with they don't know they're osteoporotic, but they had a bad cough, and they're coughing, and they ended up with rib fractures. And those rib fractures are due to osteoporosis, because when you have missing calcium in your body, you're missing it everywhere. It's not just in the hip and the wrist and in the back. It's all over, and it can be in your ribs, and it can be in your back. So any spontaneous fracture that wasn't really expected because of mass trauma. There's a cost to this too. Back pain, especially vertebral fracture. People have back pain and they don't realize it. It's because the the vertebrae, which is normal like this. This is your normal vertebrae with your discs, very nice. They're nice and high and they're very sweet. What happens when you have osteoporosis, they shrink, they become a wedge shape, and the nerves can get caught in that. And it becomes very, very painful when you have this kind of thing going on. And you'll start to see your posture change. You'll also have fear of falling if you have any fractures from osteoporosis, and your quality of life will diminish. What happens with these vertebral fractures, like I said, there's a wedging of this vertebrae. So what happens is the whole vertebrae, and I'm going to show you this, comes forward. Here we have the wedging of our vertebrae. And what happens is you get that hump back, but also your belly will protrude. Because I have very, very slim women who tell me at 70 and 75 years old, oh, I'm starting to get a belly. I never had a belly, and I'm still the same weight. It's not because you're gaining weight. It's because your posture is changing ever so slightly, and your bottom part of your spine is coming forward because your top part is losing its natural lordosis. So this would be your normal spine, okay? So where it's like that, it's now opening up like that, okay? So your whole spine changes. And with this change in your body, habits is coming over, your stomach is coming out, you get diminished lung capacity because your lungs are supposed to take up your whole thorax. Now, if you're being pushed over, your lungs are being squeezed down, and you can have shortness of breath. Back pain is not easy to control, not all the time. Now, when people have hip fractures, there are also morbidity to that, because after 25% of people after 1 year after a hip fracture have a permanent disability, and 40% of them need assistance to walk, and 80% have at least one incapacity to daily living 1 year after a hip fracture. So maybe you can't climb the stairs like you did, or maybe you can't get in and out of a car as you did, or maybe you can't stand up to do your groceries. Maybe you can't stand up at the sink. There are many capacities of daily living that should be addressed. Okay, so the cost of a hip fracture is about $26,000. To return to a community will cost $21,000, and people going to long-term care facilities would end up being $70,000 or more. So there is a cost to society when we have a hip fracture. So what are the risk factors? Number one is age. As we get older, we have a less increase dietary calcium and vitamin D. If you're postmenopausal, the estrogen works on the bone metabolism. So if you're after menopause, you don't have the estrogen there. So we continue to lose estrogen to calcium. If you have a family history of osteoporosis, that's another risk factor, because if your mother, your father, I have a family where the mother is osteoporotic and 4 daughters are all osteoporotic under the age of 60, because it's a family history of it. They have a family predisposition. So when we have a low bone density, we do a test called the bone mineral density, which I'll get to. So if you have a low body weight, like if you're very slim and slight and petite, like Sally Fields, you can have a higher risk of osteoporosis. Prolonged use of steroids, being on prednisone for other reasons, for arthritis, sarcoidosis, or other even COPD, lung problems, for more than 3 months can reduce the amount of calcium in your bones. Excess coffee drinking, more than 4 cups a day, because there's always a controversy about coffee. I happen to say I like my coffee, but no, I don't have 4 cups a day, and I don't think anyone should. But you should have, if you have too much, or too much alcohol, even the same thing, more than 2 units a day. By the way, a unit of alcohol is a shot glass, a beer, a glass of wine, a small glass of wine. And a shot glass of beer or a small glass of wine. Or so 2 units a day is more than enough. Yeah. So there's other things we have as malabsorption syndromes. If the gut is not completely intact, or there's celiac disease or something there, that gut is not able to pull in the nutrients of vitamin D and calcium. Or if you have hyperparathyroidism, which are the parathyroid glands which control calcium metabolism. If you have problems with other hypogonadism, you have androgen diminution or increase, these can cause it. Lung problems or chronic liver pathology. There are a myriad of causes to osteoporosis, but the most important one is lack of intake, because many times we can solve these problems. I mean, if it's a tumor, a parathyroid tumor, we take it out, we do something for that. But most of the time, most common is lack of calcium in our diet. So how do we diagnose this? We go to the bone mineral density machine, the DEXA machine. And the doctors get a readout like this, showing a graph of where a normal person would be at your age, a young person, and they plot you against that. Now, the graph is very interesting. They don't always give us the graphs anymore, but they do a Carrick score, which looks at your height and your weight and your density of your bone. They do it at the hip, and we do it at the vertebrae. So they're really, really helpful, and this is a marvelous tool to see the change. We do every 2-3 years to see if there's a change. And if the person is taking medication, it's important to see that also. And it's well established. So we do screening, all women and men after 65, all postmenopausal women from 50 to 65, we do it. Or if there's risk factors like this family who all have osteoporosis at a young age. All fragility fractures should have a bone densometry, no matter what the age. So the machine is one of my best machines. That's my favorite test to do. You lie down fully clothed, and this machine goes over to you with the nice music in the background, and it's quiet, and you have about a 10-minute rest. It's very, very nice to do. You don't get pushed, you don't get pulled. It's not like a mammogram. You don't get pushed, you don't get pulled, you just relax. And the machine does the work. So it's really good. So what do we do to prevent this the osteoporosis, essentially, or osteopenia, lacking or not? What do we do is we have to maintain a proper amount of calcium in our diets. So we need to we usually give people is 500 milligrams of calcium in a pill usually. And we say, eat a healthy diet, eat your cheese, eat your fish, your sardines, your oily fish, eat your beans, your dark vegetables. These are all important. I'm sure our dietitian has done many talks about how to increase the calcium in your diet. Take your vitamin D, the sunshine vitamin. Yes, we do need to have vitamin supplements. You need to take the vitamin supplements. You can either take 1,000 a day or 10,000 a week, works just as well to take it. A lot of foods are reinforced. We don't want to have too much vitamin D, but we don't want to have too little. So 10,000 once a week is more than enough of vitamin D. And 500 pill a day should help to keep your calcium levels up. That is for prevention and for treatment. Sometimes we will add other medications to help the building of the bone or to prevent the breakdown of the osteoclast from working. So you want to take your yogurts, your cheese, your orange juice that are fortified, your broccoli, and things like that. So the daily doses, a woman, I'm going to use women because that's where the studies were done, a woman needs between 2,000 international units a day, but we are getting it from other sources. And even for calcium, we need 2,000 units. But we do get calcium in other sources. Before, we used to give calcium twice a day. They do not do that anymore because we find we could have increased kidney stones and other problems. So 500 is more than enough. And eat your eggs, your salmon, your sardines, like I said. Yeah. So Make sure your diet is decent. You know, we're not just tea and toasting. Eat your vegetables and your fruits. Vitamin D is the sunshine vitamin, and that's why we take it. What happens is that we live in Canada. We're all covered up. You know, it's middle of November. We're all covered up. I go outside, maybe my face is, I have a hat on, I'm completely covered, I have gloves. I'm not going to get any vitamin D. Even in the summer, I'm not going to get enough vitamin D because the receptors on my skin as we age are not as receptive to the vitamin D. So we do need to take it by mouth. We had a lecturer from Florida who said we can lie 24 hours a day on the beach in Florida and not get enough vitamin D. He was really pushing the vitamin D. I think we don't have to overdo it. I think we just have to maintain a good amount of vitamin D. So as we get older, we lose the capacity to make vitamin D from our skin, because we could take it by mouth or we could take it naturally through our skin. But if we're covered up, we're not going to get any, not at all. The other thing we can do for osteoporosis is to make sure that we get enough exercise, because exercise, that constant micro banging on your skeleton, helps to reinforce the bone, because as it breaks a little bit, it will increase the absorption and will build bone. So what we say is it's like a cartoon. One breaks down and one builds up. Yeah. So just want to get there. Yeah. So what you need to do is what happens is you get, when you're, like I spoke about Sally Fields, how thin and slender, the women who are very heavy really have osteoporosis if there's not another problem there, because the weight is a constant force on the bones. The more you give pressure to a bone, the more you really bang on that bone, the stronger it gets. It does not, mind you, have an adequate vitamin D and calcium intake, it likes to have strength on it. It does like to move, and the exercise does help that, especially strength exercises. The treatments we have today work to either allow bone to build up and promote the osteoblasts, or inhibit the osteoclasts, make sure that these osteoclasts, the ones that eat it up, aren't working. So the medications we have are bisphosphonates, which we take either once a week or once a month, or we have donosabid, which is another medication that reduces the amount of osteoclastic reabsorption, or we have something called raloxifene, which acts like an estrogen to keep calcium in the bone, or there's a daily injection of Forteo teriparatide, which will allow bone building. Now, going back to this beautiful vertebrae bone, once these little bridges are broken, we can't make them come back. But what we can is reinforce these bridges to get stronger with good quality bone, according to what the studies are showing. And that's where we use the donosabid, the teriparatide, and those really do work. Sometimes people who are taking the bisphosphonates have some problems with digestion, their heartburn, because they're a little complicated to take. You have to take them fasting, and then you can't eat anything for an hour, and then you can eat after an hour. So you can't take your medications, you can't have your breakfast, you can just essentially brush your teeth and that's it. So you do have to wait the hour before taking it. The donosabid is an injection every 6 months. It's very easy to give. The raloxifene also is a pill. The teriparatide, like I said, is an injection daily for 2, 3, 4 years. Okay, so I'm open to any, and essentially, another way we can protect ourselves is to, if we really can't take medication, is hip protectors. We have plastic inserts. Sometimes we use these in nursing homes or that people who may have risk of falling, what they do is they stick that in, they have these special underwear with these pockets to hold like hockey protectors on the hips so that when they fall, they don't break anything. Or we put a pad down on the floor next to the bed that is very low so that if they fall, they don't fall on their hip. It's very complicated. You have to see your doctor, have a blood test, make sure that you're not anemic, make sure that you don't have any other diseases going on, thyroid problems. Watch the coffee intake, watch your smoking, never smoke, and you can reduce the amount of fractures that we have. And that's about it. And I'll be happy to take any questions if there are.